All right, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Sunday Stream Monday edition, broadcasting this stream on a Monday. My guest today is Nix Jeelvy. He's the host of the Writers Bloc, as I'm sure many, if not most of you know. And he is also a contributor to Counter Currents. Um, I've invited him on to talk about um, some of the things that have been going on in the world, but particularly the right wing, the dissident right reaction to them, and how we position ourselves as these things occur around us. Nix, welcome to the stream. How you doing?
Doing great, Pox, and thank you for inviting me on.
My pleasure. So, something that I think you and I are similar on, have similar views on, is over the past perhaps year or so, there's definitely been some division amongst the dissident right. Um, People have fallen into quite distinct camps, whether it's the coup and the response to it, the impositions, the restrictions, all that sort of thing. Um, Whether it's the Russia versus Ukraine conflict, there seems to have been quite a lot of different angles and different positions that people are taking, and sometimes it's been a bit frustrating. So why don't you explain to us where you stand on some of the things that have been going on um, over the past, like I would say, maybe 16 months.
Well, if you're asking me about my position on coronavirus and the various associated tyrannies, we are on YouTube. How much? How free can I be in in the way I express myself?
Apparently, like, don't say anything that goes against the WHO regulations or anything like that. Um, or I don't know
Okay.
because it's strange. I've said in many videos that I have certain contrarian views on this, and none of those videos have been taken down. But then I did a stream last month, and I expressed the same opinions, and they took that stream down. But then I reposted it. It's fine. So I don't really know. Just say what you want to say, and if they take it down, they take it down. I can't really say that I care too much.
Okay. Let's put it diplomatically. Um, I won't pretend that I'm a medical professional,
Hmm.
but this lack of credential notwithstanding, I do know a thing or two about the human body and the human immune system for a couple of reasons. The first is I come from a family of medical professionals. I have a lot of very close relatives who are doctors and actually prominent doctors in Macedonia, where I'm from.
Hmm.
And secondly, I was going to be a doctor for a while before I switched to law. So, from my limited understanding of the human body and its immune system, I can conclude that the last 2 years of lockdowns and mandatory vaccinations were not driven by a concern for human health.
Hmm.
Anything beyond that, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't heard. I wasn't there, and if I was there, I was asleep.
Yeah.
It's a Sicilian. I have a Sicilian way of not knowing about these things, uh, but it is how what it is. I oppose those positions, right?
Yeah.
And as to the second divisive thing, I think we can freely speak about it for the time being. I have I support Ukraine in the Russo-Ukrainian war, while at the same time recognizing that Russia does have legitimate interests
Hmm.
with regard to security, with regard to shared history and culture with Ukraine. I do not think that those issues are best resolved through war, but here we are. I support Ukraine on nationalist grounds. I do not support its entry into NATO. I do not support Sweden and Finland entering NATO. I think this would be bad for Finland and Sweden. You know,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's my position on it. I have that cunty, nuanced position on both questions. I'm not with either camp. And as to the divisions, I'm going to quote someone you really don't like. I know you don't like him, Keith Woods, but he
Hey.
recently had that video where he enumerated all of the factions of the so-called dissident right.
Mm,
And in the end, he said, this is not a movement, right? This is not
right.
a coherent force. And I happen to agree with him. It's a dog's breakfast of people dissatisfied who, like that to guy from the meme, don't support the current thing, right?
Right.
Um, that's not a political identity. And I agree with Keith on that. Oh,
I would say, for as much as I uh, disagree with Keith, and not even disagree, I just find him disagreeable. Uh, I would actually say that I think he's right on that too. Um, let's talk more about the Russia Ukraine conflict, because I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the moment for you and for me where we realize that, as you just said, this really isn't a movement, and we don't seem to agree on much, actually, as far as what goals we have in common. And we'll get to this much later. What is our vision that we have for the future? What would we like to achieve? And I think the pandemic, whether you want to put quotes around that or not, and now this conflict, have been two really important uh, events, and we were kind of not prepared. We it seemed like, for all of the talk and all of the streams and all the articles and all of the salon culture that has been developed, when two real world events, two very substantive real world events occurred, it all counted for very little, because it seemed like positions were just reverted to knee jerk reactions, or well, if it pisses off the libs, it must be good. So let's talk more about the Russia Ukraine thing, because I do think that has been really transformative. And in my case, I wrote an article on my Substack titled "The Dissident Right is Dead," because I just feel like um, a lot of the values that we purported were kind of chucked out the window, and there was a lot of um, I would describe it as pretty much obscene uh, pro-Russian support that came from very prominent figures. But then it was also just what you would see in different chat groups and forums and all that sort of thing. You would just see a lot of a lack of that sort of cunty nuance that you mentioned, and it was just really like, uh, I don't know. It was a bit disappointing. Um, so, what are your thoughts on that? And you mentioned that you support Ukraine. I'm not ready to say I support either side, but I do fall on the side of, I don't like seeing the Ukrainian nation invaded and its people killed by a globalist empire, basically, but just of a different stripe. So go ahead and expound on your thoughts on that.
who? Well, like I said, I hold a this is from the start it's an emotional subject for me because it's not only that I live closer to Russia than most of the dissident right,
Hmm.
except maybe the Finns and the Swedes. There's a lot of Finns, there's a lot of Swedes in the whole nationalist scene, but also because I am of Russian descent, and well, I s- my family comes from somewhere near Odessa, and It had a house in the city itself, lands outside of Odessa, and lands also somewhere along the banks of the Dniester River. So that region, they were an aristocratic family. So it's not clear whether they were Russian or Ukrainian or, like most of the Russian aristocracy, German, right? But I come from that region. So I have a sort of romantic nostalgia, genetic maybe, about Russia and Ukraine. I think about it. I have a lot of friends also who are white Russians, refugees from the Russian Revolution here in Macedonia. It's a small community, not as substantial as in other countries, but a lot of people moved here from Russia because they were enemies of Bolshevism.
Hmm.
So this is not an abstract conflict to me. Now, it's nowhere near as concrete as it is for Russians and Ukrainians, right? But again, and so I realized from the start that I'm going to be very emotional about this. So I've tried to be maximally controlled about it, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if I've succeeded, but I will say I recognize that the Russian state, as it is an empire. It is a multiracial empire. It is a multi-ethnic empire, and it is beginning to turn into a multicultural empire. Now, I'm
Hmm.
not 100% against multi-ethnic societies. I'm against multiracial societies. I don't think they can work, but multi-ethnic polities, states, I'm not especially against them, right?
Hmm.
For example, if you had maybe a unity of Spain and Portugal, and we could be sure that the Spanish would not try to assimilate the Portuguese, I would not oppose that. I would not oppose an empire like the Habsburg Empire, for example. I was recently reading about the history of Finland, and for a period of time, Finland was a part of Russia, and Finnish nationalism arose really as a reaction to attempts to Russicize the Finns, whereas when the Russians respected the nationality and the separate ethnic identity of the Finns were fanatically loyal subjects of the Tsar.
Hmm.
So that's something to think about, right? So on nationalist grounds, I wouldn't even oppose a union of Russia and Ukraine. However, in the current disposition of the Russian state, which intends to Russify Ukraine, to erase the unique Ukrainian ethnic identity, I cannot support that. You know, I cannot, in good faith, support that kind of military operation, that kind of war to annex Ukraine, and subsequently, because you see it from Russian media, this is the official line in Moscow that there is no way that Ukrainian national identity could not be fascist. And in
Right.
their parlance, right, this means that we're going to erase these people. We're going to culturally erase them. Doesn't mean there's going to be a genocide of Ukrainians. It does mean there's going to be cultural genocide. It means probably a prohibition of the Ukrainian language, the spreading of propaganda in schools and media, and ultimately the elimination of the culture bearing stratum of the Ukrainian nation. So everyone who writes in that language, writers, poets, filmmakers, artists, intellectuals, military elite, political elite, business elite. Now, some of these people are horribly corrupt. They are scum, but some of them are good people, right?
Right.
And people are, as a general rule, corrupt. So let's not throw stones because we all live in glass houses on that. And that I cannot support in any way. If this were really just about Russian security concerns, I would be far more ambivalent about it, but it's not. It's very obviously not. The regime currently in the Kremlin, I don't want to call it Russian because Russian nationalists tell me it's actually very anti Russian,
Hmm. So,
obviously wants to erase Ukrainians as a separate nation. And that's not something I cannot even be ambivalent towards it. I can only oppose it. I will, on the other hand, understand the perspective of Western nationalists who really just want their primary enemy, which is the American empire, to take an L.
Right.
I'm not sure how much of an L the global empire can take in Ukraine, but I understand and respect that position. So that's my cunty nuanced position there.
So do you think that so you say you respect and understand that position? I do as well. I would say I understand it. I'm not sure I respect it. I understand it, certainly. And I also understand your position, and I think I do respect it because on the very grounds that you've mentioned, I also don't really look upon Russia's invasion with smiling eyes. And I don't really think that it's causing that much of an L for the American empire. I think the American empire is causing itself plenty of L's. Just look at the joke of the Biden administration, and they're having plenty of L's, but they're not really losing any power though. In fact, I could argue that they've been gaining power, certainly over the lives of the citizens. Um, and so, where do you think that the right or certain parts of the right has gone wrong with regards to our position on Russia and Ukraine, this conflict? Because for my from my perspective, and this is what I wrote about, and this is what I was speaking out about at the sort of in February and March. Um, One of the reasons why I saw people were taking a very pro-Russian stance and very much cheering for Russia and thinking that this was based, and it was so great to see sticking a finger in the eye of NATO and global homo and all that, was that it was motivated, or the wellspring was this sort of Christian nationalism, and they looked upon the actions of Putin and Russia as a sort of, you know, a holy war almost. That this Russian Orthodox trad wholesome country was taking the sword to the degenerate global homo Western forces, Western Empire, and we've just seen that one of the loudest cheerleaders, one of the loudest promoters of this Christian nationalism, Nick Fuentes, turns out he's a total fraud. And I said as much. I said that he is just using this Christian identity as a grift, like so many politicians do, like Donald Trump does, like George W. Bush did. Um, he's not actually a Christian at all. And I think that uh, that's been revealed just very recently, but it was obvious to me. It was obvious to my eyes. And so,
Yeah, it's very obvious. Like the look, I am a Christian, right? I'm an Orthodox Christian. I think you know this,
mhm,
although you wouldn't know because I don't wear my faith on my sleeve. Jesus is actually very explicit in the Bible about not being very loudly and very publicly Christian. That you should do your good works and your prayer, everything religious. You should do it in a humble way. This is not something to beat people over the head with. Faith is a serious thing, right?
mhm,
And my faith, I take my faith seriously because, as I get older and as my life actually gets more and more difficult, I find that faith is a great comfort as
sure.
things get more difficult for people in the West, right? For dissidents in particular, as the prosecution ramps up, I find it far more necessary for me to anchor myself to the infinite, to
Mhm.
God, essentially, to just to remain sane, just to keep my mental health, really, my wearing my wherewithal. But I don't. This is not a new set of clothes I like to show off for people. This is not a cudgel with which to beat people. It's something, you know, different.
Right, and I totally respect that. Um, what was happening during the months of the Russian invasion? What you had characters like Lauren Vitsky, obviously I mentioned Nick Fuentes, Vincent James, um, and others, and then almost every member of their fan base, which numbers tens of thousands of people, um, sort of promoting this idea that we should support Russia, not just because we want to see the Biden administration take an L, but also because, and primarily because, this is some great crusade of Christianity, of Russian Orthodoxy, cleansing the world, cleansing the degeneracy of the West. And obviously, I just don't think I think that's demonstrably false. I don't think Russia is this trad, wholesome Christian nation, nor do those things motivate the decisions of Putin and his regime. Where do you think that was one of my main criticisms of the pro-Russia side. Where do you think that the right, who has fallen into that camp, is going wrong? You said you understand the position, but I imagine you have some criticisms of it. So where do you think they're going a bit wrong here?
Well, as you said, this is actually a question of empirical fact. To say that Russia is a Christian nation or a traditionalist nation or a nation where Christian traditionalism is supported by the government, or at the very least not persecuted by the government, this is a yes or no question. Is Russia a Christian nation? The answer is no, not the way Nick Fuentes would love it. Because if in the sense that a majority of Russians say that they are Christian, yeah, but so do a majority of Americans. Is America a Christian nation? Is the American state therefore Christian? No.
Hmm.
Does the state in Russia promote traditional Christianity? No, this is not true. The state in Russia builds cathedral churches, such as the Church of the Armed Forces, which they don't look very Christian to me. I think that it looks a little too much like idolatry of the state, or an organ of the state, which is the armed forces, right? Uh, there are some nuances, some differences, right? So Russia is an Orthodox country. This is a different kind of Christianity than what people are maybe used to in the West. Max Weber, the sociologist, identified this trait in the East, right? It begins really with the Byzantine Empire, that the church is always subordinated to the state without fail. And I'm not theoretically opposed to this. You look at all of the Orthodox countries, they have national churches, right? So I'm Macedonian, I'm part of the Macedonian Orthodox Church. In Greece, you have the Greek Orthodox Church. In Serbia, the Serbian Orthodox Church. In Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church. Even though we are theoretically of the same faith, we do not belong to the same church organizations, right? So, and the church is always, regardless of what says in the constitutions, regardless of what the government says, the church is always subordinate to the state. Even in Macedonia's liberal secular constitution, it says the government shall not infringe upon the rights of the religious communities, including the Macedonian Orthodox Church, the Macedonian Islamic community, etc., etc. So, and it actually names these two religious communities as, that's the thing.
Hmm.
It's right in the state constitution. So this is a legacy of the Byzantine Empire. It's Caesaro-Papistic. So the state is always involved in church affairs. There's
Hmm.
no separation of church and state, not even theoretically, as there is in the West. Even when in the East we try to impose these forms, no, our Byzantine nature comes to the fore. So if the church is subordinate to the state and the state is not Christian, right, then the
Hmm.
church, is it really Christian, or is whatever Christian things the state does just a product of this Byzantine form? Right, and it's
Right.
pro form, and a lot of Christians, a lot of Orthodox Christians, both in Russia and outside of it, complain about the servile nature of the Russian church, its corruption, its just astounding lack of spirituality,
Hmm.
and really subordination of the interests of the faith to the interests of the Russian state, really beyond what the Byzantine model would offer. So, and of course, the Russian Orthodox Church actually frowns upon too strong, too traditional expressions of the Christian faith.
Hmm.
It's there to contain the religious impulse of the Russian people, which is actually fairly strong. The best thing about Russia is the Russian people. They are a sturdy stock. They're not trads. They're not all of these things we imagine them to be. But, you know, as my friend Riley Wagaman of the Edward Slav Squad blog is fond of pointing out, they are more suspicious of the government and the elite than Westerners, and as a result, they are a lot more based in practice. This does not translate to government action or church action in Russia. The people are actually more based. They're not trad, but there is that element of basically Russians were in the 90s where maybe the Western normie is today after 2 years of lockdowns. And after 2 years of lockdowns in Russia, the Russians are really just completely and utterly, they don't believe anything the government says as well.
Well, so hearing all that, it just makes it seem even more disappointing and frustrating that so many on the right seem to have been duped by this false image of Russia being this trad, nationalist, wholesome Orthodox haven. Because as the conflict carried on, it just became really increasingly unseemly, undignified, and unworthy of the values that I thought we stood for. So you mentioned earlier that you oppose this invasion on nationalist grounds, and I thought that, I'm speaking for myself, that is where I would oppose it from as well. And I thought that putting the European peoples first, our survival first, our gene pool first, given the precarious situation that most European peoples find themselves in today, I thought that that took precedence over, um, you know, allegiances to a state or to a religion. And then, when you realize that the religion that you think is being promoted by this country, or that is so strong in this country, isn't quite what meets the eye, it just makes it even more disappointing. Because and I started thinking about this as we got into late March and into April, and this conflict is still going on, and it's getting worse and worse. And I could just imagine, well, one day, what if Chinese or Russian or Moroccan tanks start rolling through the streets of the Spanish town where I live in, and the bombs are falling, and they are, Spaniards are being shot left and right, dying in the streets, and miles away in the safety of their living rooms are a bunch of online dissident right folk cheering it on because it's, based trad China or based Islamo trad Moroccans killing the global homo Spaniards, because Spain is one of the most progressive countries in Europe. I've described it as a feminist dictatorship, as a matriarchy, um, and yet I wouldn't be very happy to see Moroccan or Chinese or Russian troops storming through Spain and killing Spaniards. And yet, over the course of February, March, and April, it seemed like there were plenty of people in the online right who didn't, who suddenly, people who used to say no more brother wars and, whites unite and all that kind of thing. And now suddenly it became that wasn't so important anymore, and it was more important that NATO take an L, and so they were happy to cheer for the complete destruction of the Ukrainian people, as long as it makes the West sort of wobbly on its pedestal. and it's also kind of like delusions of grandeur as well, like this idea that, oh, it's good for the online right, it's good for the dissident right, that the 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 gay the global American empire is chipped away at, because then we can come in and take power. It's just like, I don't think that that's how it's going to play out. But yeah, it was just very strange and off-putting to see like how many people in the dissident nationalist, European nationalist, quote unquote white nationalist right didn't seem to factor in the that they were cheering for an invasion, an invading force killing white Europeans. It was very strange, and I had the impression that they would cheer for this in other countries as well, including the one I live in.
Right. Well, I don't know if they would cheer if Morocco invaded Spain. Not because Moroccans are very visibly non-white and they're Muslim, but because I don't think that Moroccans actively try to influence the dissident thought space,
Mm.
whereas
I
Russia
think there might be a few
definitely
like
does.
like the based Islam people might be
Yeah,
might have
the
a few
base
positive takes.
the based Islam. Okay, look, probably one of the most Islamophilic people in the dissident right, and I've caught a lot of flack for saying that, look, Islam is a factor in the world and it's not going away. And some white people are also Muslims, right? And people have criticized me strongly for pointing this out, but I say to them, a lot of people in the Balkans are Muslims.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
Bosniaks, they are white and they are Muslim. Albanians, some people think they're not white, some people think they are white. Let's call them a boundary people. They are 60% Muslim.
Hmm.
About a percentage of Macedonians, I'm not sure just how much, are of the Muslim faith, right? A certain percentage of Bulgarians also. These are all white peoples. They are Muslim. A lot of people in Turkey are white. People very strongly disagreed with me when I said that some Turks, especially the elite, are white. They are also Muslim, right? I
Hmm.
mean, and so because I am a white nationalist, I'm not a religious imperialist or whatever. I say Muslim white people are welcome in the ethno state insofar as they're loyal to their ethnos. If
Hmm.
they're loyal to the Muslim faith, then yeah, out they go. I agree with that. A lot of these people cheering Russia on are posting white Sharia memes about the Chechens. The Chechens, I would
Mm.
say, are a boundary people. They're not 100% white, but like you look up a picture of Ramzan Kadyrov and you say, yeah, this guy, he could be Southern Russian. Guy could be Ukrainian. Who knows? Maybe he is. Maybe he has some Slavic descent. Who knows? But I lost my train. Yeah. So I think that if Morocco invaded Spain or the Maghreb League, whatever, invaded Spain, there would not be so much cheering because I don't think the Islamic world has as much influence within the dissident thought space. And this is something I noticed uh, in in the wake of this invasion, in the wake of this war, which Russia has waged on Ukraine, that the info war has not just been waged on normie thought space, right? You have the channels which try to influence central discourse like Intel Slava and Russians
Hmm.
with Attitude, but also dissident thought space. You have Gonzalo Lira spreading lies. You
Yeah.
have basically him announcing that Kharkov has been taken 6 times in the first 2 days of the invasion, where Russia tried once or twice to take Kharkov and lost half a battalion tactical group in this blunder, just blundered into the suburbs and was shredded to pieces. This was what happened in Kharkov, and Kharkov was under partial siege until very recently. But no, the city was not taken by Russia. I saw it reported 6 times by these people. And
Hmm.
what occurred to me, and I wrote a post on countercurrents, I wrote an article for countercurrents on this. It's My friend Riley Wagaman of the Edward Slav Squad blog, he lives in Russia, so he actually knows these things inside and out, watches Russian media. He called it complete epistemic failure, right? The dissident thought space, Un's review, the you know, dissident media
Hmm.
completely bought first the narrative that Russia is not going to attack Ukraine before the war. And I think we discussed this on when you were on my show. And then the pro-Russian narrative. Now you have suddenly supposed nationalists spreading, these narratives about how Ukraine is a fake nation.
Mm.
You know, what does that mean, fake nation?
Yeah.
Right? People come to me and say, "Oh, you Macedonians are a fake nation." I'm like, "Oh, well, thank you, random anonymous internet person. I'm not going to reject my heritage and everything my grandparents taught me about being Macedonian and all of the songs and all of the folk poetry and all of the basically our cuisine, all of our material culture, which is unique and very different from that of our surrounding nations. And I'm going to listen to you because you called me a fake
It's
nation. What
just
the fuck? What does that mean?"
it's such a blue check Twitter argument. Like, what does it mean to be a Macedonian? What does it mean to be English? What does it mean to
Right,
like? It's bad enough that we have to deal with this in the mainstream ether and from all of the
right.
blue ticks on Twitter with their 50,000 bots of followers. But then now to have that argument also regurgitated by people who are supposedly on our own side, using that kind of argumentation when convenient for them in an online spat is just really it's again it's disappointing and frustrating to have to deal with that on your own team, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. And it's basically, I concluded that for whatever reason, the Russian state wants to influence this thought space. And in this, I actually see it as a sort of a white pill because we are important enough to merit the attention of the Russian state. And we're also important enough to merit the attention of the states in the West, right? People have said, "Oh, you're paranoid that there's a lot of feds," but there are a lot of feds lurking in the various chats. There's a lot of, I've also written about cognitive infiltration. There's a paper co-written by Cass Sunstein, who is Jewish, and Adrian Vermeulen, who is a Catholic integralist, and he's actually the Catholic integralism guy over on Twitter. It dates back from 2006 or 7, I forget. It's called Conspiracy Theories, and it says that the way to dislodge the conspiracy theory narratives is cognitive infiltrations. Find where people congregate on the internet to discuss these things, right? And
Hmm.
break up the hardcore supporters of these quote unquote conspiracy theories, right? Not by arresting them, not by observing them, not even by inserting agent provocateurs to get them to do violent shit, but by introducing doubt, division, and false narratives among them. Basically, this is what this is cognitive infiltration. This is what it means. You
Hmm.
infiltrate this group for the express purpose of misleading the not even the low-ranking grug brains and just anons, but to mislead the prominent movement leaders, right?
Right.
So this is what cognitive infiltration is, and these are not nobodies. Like Cass Sunstein is the husband of a Samantha Power. I believe we all know who Samantha Power is. She's an extremely high-ranking diplomat in the United States Department of State. He's a law professor at Harvard, I believe. So is Adrian Vermeulen. This is bipartisan. Cass Sunstein is a Democrat. Vermeulen is a Republican. This was implemented, I believe, during the Bush administration, continued by the Obama and Trump administrations. And it has been implemented previously before this article was written, before this white paper on cognitive infiltration was written. A form of it was implemented in the Arabic language to disrupt anti-American organizations in Iraq. So
Hmm.
this is peak fifth generation warfare. You head off fourth generation warfare in Iraq by disrupting the very ideas which could lead to people organizing to resist the American occupation. And it is these lessons from the American military in Iraq, by having, you know, Arabic speaking soldiers and feds posing as Iraqis saying, brothers, we should not fight the Americans, or maybe, you know, directing them again. Israel, we know Israel does this. It tries to direct Arabs away from Arab nationalism and towards Islamic fundamentalism, because Islamic fundamentalism, it's easier to manipulate, it's easier to channel the ire of Islamic fundamentalists towards the West, because you got religious argumentation against the degeneracy of the West, whereas Arab nationalism, it's more concerned with questions in the Middle East. It's more concerned with, well, there are this tribe of outsiders in a space which should be for Arabs, right? And you understand what I'm trying to say here is,
Oh yeah.
I believe our spaces are deeply cognitively infiltrated by American feds, and since since February 24th, I am now convinced that the Russian state is also trying to cognitively infiltrate this thought space. Now, the Russians, they're not as adroit at this shit as the Americans and British and Europeans. They're more direct people, right? I've met quite a lot of Russians in my life. They're not very good at subterfuge. And I'm sure that the Chinese try stuff like this, although for the life of me, I don't know how we would sniff out a Chinese cognitive infiltrator. In before Keith Woods, I think he's sincere. I disagree with a lot of people who are saying bad things about him. If he's misguided, he's misguided. If he's wrong, he's wrong. But I don't think Keith Woods is a bad actor.
There's a good video by Brendan O'Connell about this cognitive infiltration. I would recommend people look for it on his channel. He gets censored a lot. His channels gets taken down quite often. So if that video is still up, I hope it is, and if it is, it's worth watching. It's about an hour and a half long, and it has some good. It's basically like what you just said is the TLDR version of that. A lot of this is going on. You could include Alex Jones as an example of this. You could include even Project Veritas as an example of this. These are definitely examples of this sort of that cognitive infiltration, and it's very difficult to know who is who and who can be trusted. Okay, I think we've talked enough about this. I wanted to move on to another topic, another theme that I think has been a cause of some frustration, some division, some infighting, quote unquote. And to be honest, I'm not actually all that opposed to infighting, especially given the times we're in now. I think if we have significant differences, it's better to just note, draw the lines in the sand, and just carry on. We don't have to call it infighting if we just have different objectives, different goals, and different perspectives. And again, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think another one of the causes for some of your recent frustration or disillusionment with the distant right has been this debate between the negative vision and the positive vision. And you wrote a really good piece for Countercurrents on the negative vision and where you think some of its flaws are. So just go ahead and briefly give us your thoughts on sort of lay the groundwork for us. What is the negative vision? What are some of its flaws that you have identified? And what would be your counter proposal to a negative vision?
Well, I don't even call it a negative vision, because it's not a vision. This is something I learned when I was selling life insurance, believe it or not, because I used to sell life insurance in a previous life. It's something that one of the elder salesmen said to me: if you want to succeed, you got to visualize yourself as a successful person, right? And what do you want out of life? He asks me, and he says, "Yeah, just say it, whatever comes to your mind." And I said, "I want a helicopter." He said, "Good, visualize yourself in a helicopter." You know, it was really, I was young. I was 21 at the time. Doesn't matter. Anyways, the point is, right?
Well, I mean, that's actually something that a lot of even like sports psychologists do to help athletes, is like visualize
Yeah,
yourself winning the 100 meters, winning
right,
the boxing match or whatever, you know, and it works. It helps them.
right. I actually do this. I don't know if it's good for my mental health. I'm a naturally prideful person, so maybe I shouldn't do this, but I actually visualize myself and our extended peer group, as schizos, Heath likes to call us. Well, I think that I would fall in his classification under ethno-nationalist, and you would straddle the line between ethno-nationalist and schizo, but doesn't matter. I like to imagine our group as we are the ruling class of the West. So you are king of Spain, I'm king of Macedonia, all of these things. Kappa perspective, we have him as viceroy of China, which is our dependency.
Brilliant.
My point is, this is a positive vision. This is a vision. Whereas the negative vision is, we want to kill those bastards. Oh, well, maybe just displace them from power. I forget I said that. We wanna defeat these bastards, displace them from power, and that's it. After that, everyone goes home. What are
Mm,
you gonna do? How do you visualize that? The only way
mhm.
you can really visualize that is somebody visualizing some pretty nasty crap. And when I say visualize, I literally mean visualize in your mind's eye. What does it look like?
Mhm.
Because when I say I have a positive vision, I have a positive vision for European ethnic nationalism. I can see the map of Europe, and it's all white people, and maybe we have some multi-ethnic societies, but every ethnicity is respected, every white ethnicity is respected. Maybe European countries are allied to each other, they're friendly to each other, maybe there are economic blocks, military and diplomatic blocks, but I have an idea of what victory looks like, at which point I say, okay, we have won. I have contributed to this victory. I want my reward, which is a villa on the Adriatic coast, an unlimited alcohol budget, and freedom to write my silly science fiction novels.
Mhm.
This is where I stop doing politics and start doing science fiction, which is what I've always wanted to do when I retired. The problem is, yeah, that's the thing that I visualize, right?
Mhm.
That's what I drive towards. Whereas when you have nothing to visualize, no victory to visualize, all you really want to do is, to quote a certain, I wouldn't call him a friend, but yeah, he's in these circles, clear them out,
Mhm.
right? What do you do after? What happens afterwards?
Right.
That's the
So let's
first thing.
let's
The
let's talk
second
about.
thing is, right, we
Sorry,
are
go on. Go
trying to
on.
get a negative coalition going. What you get then is this dog's breakfast of messaging. And we have empirical evidence that such coalition building of just we are against this, it's schizophrenic. It's completely
Mhm.
schizophrenic. I mentioned the Hungarian election in my article, and I spoke about it with Mr. John Morgan on the Writers Bloc, which is my own show. And they had this coalition of everyone who opposes Orban, Viktor Orban. It includes right wingers, left wingers, it included socialists, liberals, social democrats. And so you had schizophrenic messaging. And the people ask this coalition, what are you for? And they say, we're against Orban. Yeah, you defeat Orban, and then you got 4 more years in power as a government. What are you going to do in those 4 years? We will not be Orban, right? And
Mhm.
even if you hate Orban, right, Viktor Orban, you don't know what you're getting with these people. Are they communists? Are they liberals? Are they social democrats? What are they going to do? What is their position? They oppose Orban? You know what? Orban's a piece of shit, but he's the devil I know. These people
Mm.
are schizos, right? There is no coherent message here. All they really do is oppose Orban. They have no idea how to govern. And so even though people were saying Orban is unpopular after 12 years of in power, and anyone would be unpopular after 12 years in power,
Hmm.
he actually won the biggest victory he ever won in
Right.
Hungary. This was in April, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is what you get when you have negative coalitions. This is this is the result of not having a positive vision, because you have nothing to sell. When I used to sell life insurance to people, I would sell to them the vision of them in their old age being financially secure, actually enjoying their golden years, instead of depending on the state for your crappy pension because you've saved and invested in a life insurance policy. You know, you're going
Mm-hmm.
to have a dignified old age. You're going to be 65 and you're going to be able to afford gifts for your grandchildren. You're going to be able to afford trips, to the sea, to warmer climes, because you're going to be an old man and you're going to lose your tolerance for cold weather, right? You're not going to be able to work anymore. You're going to work less, but you're going to be financially secure. That's a positive vision. When you sell people, like, or when you're selling sports cars, you're selling to him the vision of, yeah, this car is going to get you all the babes you can, more babes than you can fuck, right? You're not you're not selling someone, well, it's not an economy car.
Yeah.
You can't sell a negative vision.
So the let's talk about the clear them out meme, which is something that has been popularized, if not created, by uh, academic agent, who I know that you and him have been having this sort of back and forth, and that's kind of why I wanted to invite you on, just so we could talk more about this, flesh these ideas out more than just sniping on Telegram and that sort of thing. Because I do like academic agent. I had lumped him in with the sort of obscenely pro-Russian people in late February or March, because he had made a comment that I do admit to misremembering exactly, but it was basically like, um, if you sympathize with Ukraine, you're like basically supporting the global homo gay American empire. Um, but I did come around to seeing that academic agent did have a more nuanced take on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. But a lot of the people in his chat, a lot of his followers, did not follow in his footsteps, and they were obscenely pro-Russian, like we were talking about earlier. So, between you and let me say, in comparison to you and academic agent, I'm a university dropout, so I'm not going to have as much credentials to throw into the ring here. But just from my own understanding of things, of history, it just seems like it's almost like a no-brainer that you can't only have a negative vision, because then you'll end up with things like the French Revolution. You'll end up descending into chaos if you don't have a positive vision to work towards and unite people. And I wanted to read some paragraphs from your article, a paragraph from your article, which I think kind of sums it up in a very good way. You wrote, an even bigger problem arises from the negative approach in the context of a small and embattled group such as white identitarian nationalists in the West. Let's say that we temporarily shelved the idea of the ethno-state and focused on doing as much damage as possible to the enemy. The first question we have to ask ourselves, of course, is who is the enemy? This is problematic to answer because there are multiple groups operating in the world, all vying for power. We do not have a single enemy, but rather we have multiple groups of enemies, some of whom are opposed to each other as well, whereas others pose as friends. And I think uh, that's something we've seen play out time and time again. When you just have, like, look at even the slave revolt in Haiti. That was a negative vision. Just drive out the French, drive out the Europeans, and then what happened? It just descended into chaos. I mentioned the French Revolution. There's all sorts of examples from history where if you don't have a positive vision, you just end up not only descending into chaos, but also purges, and people who were on the same side just moments before are now at each other's throat. I know that Academic Agent has done a few streams on this, and he's written about it on his Substack, but it was behind a paywall, so I didn't read it. I'm an unemployed teacher, so I can't really be throwing my money around. But and then I know he had like a really intense disagreement with Joel Davis about it, because Joel Davis was doing this sort of like hatchling thing of, like, well, who is the enemy? And I think AA got frustrated because in his mind, and I can understand this, the enemy is
Well, no,
is obvious.
it's not a hatchling thing, right? This is where I know you may I know it's Joel has been unfair to you in the past, right? But it wasn't a hatchling thing. Joel was trying to draw attention to the fact that unless you have a positive vision, this is something I don't know if you caught the show I did with Catherine about Mircea Eliade's Sacred and the Profane.
Mhm.
It basically, and you would actually do very well because you're interested in European native faith and questions of religion as well. You would do well to read this book yourself. I greatly recommend it. But one of the biggest takeaways from that book is that religion is not just something optional. We need it. We need it
Mhm.
to orient ourselves in the world, right? Religion tells you where the center of the world is, where the outer darkness is, where the demons carrying the darkness are, how we can sacralize and resacralize our profane existence, right?
Mhm.
So these are all very important things. So, for example, let's say I'm a Muslim, right? The central of the world is obviously Mecca, and the sacral plane is Dar al Islam, the House of Islam. The realm of chaos is Dar al Harb, the House of War, the House of the infidels, the lands of the infidels. That the mnemonic entities are the infidels, the polytheists, but some of them, the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, they can be won over, they can be redeemed, they can be saved, right?
Mhm.
Or they can live on as zimmis, right? And
Mhm.
of course, this religion gives me directions on how to live my life righteously. So I pray 5 times a day, I face Mecca, I go on the Hajj, I give zakat to the poor, etc., 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 all of the tenets of the Muslim faith. And all of a sudden, whereas as a person of no faith, I have no orientation of the world, as a Muslim or a Christian or a pagan or a Hindu, I actually know quite a lot about the world. The world makes sense, the world has meaning. So when I have a positive vision, ideology is the same, right? I'm a nationalist. I'm a white nationalist. I'm a Macedonian nationalist, but I'm also a white nationalist. This means that while I support the interests of the Macedonian people, I support those interests within the context of the racial interests of the white race, of European people, right? So this gives me the tools necessary to orient myself when things happen in the world. Where is the center of the world for me? Europe, right? What is the house, the sacral plane, the plane uh, of cosmos, right? It is the lands where white people live and rule. What is the plane of chaos, right? As opposed to cosmos, it is where non-whites live and rule. Are there people who are maybe non-white but redeemable? Yes, we know who they are. Certain homeless Austrian painter at one point called them honorary Aryans. So this is actually, it's not just an ideology. I use this to orient myself in the world, and this framework, it's also an operational framework. It's not just something I believe, it is something which endows me with tools and knowledge necessary for me to operate in this world. It draws a distinct friend enemy distinction. So when Joel asks, well, you have a negative vision, clear them out. Who
Mhm.
are they? A white nationalist can answer that. Who are
Mhm.
they? They are the non whites. We need to clear them out of our country. A Marxist can answer that. The bourgeoisie. A Christian nationalist can answer that. But someone who just opposes the current thing, who are they? Who are us? What is our place? What is their place? What is the center of the world? What is the realm of chaos? What is the cosmos? What is the sacred realm? What is the sacred time? Because there's also sacred time, right? Not just in the past, but also in the future. What does the kingdom of heaven look like? What does hell look like? All of these are questions which you need a faith, an ideology, a framework for interpreting the world to answer. Without it, if you are non ideological, atheistic, you don't, it's not that you can more easily or less easily achieve things. You do not know what things to achieve because
Hmm.
you have no map with which to orient yourself in the world. Now, it's very important not to confuse the map for the territory, but that doesn't mean you don't need a map.
Right. And actually, I agree with
So, yeah, Joel vindicated. Even though I know he has disrespected you in the past, I'm sorry, he's just right on this.
I actually am unaware of any time that he's even mentioned me. Um, so actually, I didn't comment too much on Joel and AA's discussion. I know
Can
they
I
did
just
like,
address a comment from the Woodlander in the chat?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just highlight it about Trumpton. Yeah,
Trumpton. Yep, here it is.
yeah. AA did. The Woodlander says AA did try a positive strategy first with his Trumpton vision. It got torn to bits, which is a shame because it was a step in the right direction. I'm going to agree that it was a step in the right direction, in the sense that yeah, people should strive towards something, but
Hmm.
just because Trump, see, Bertie Nima Parvini, he got it into his head that because people did not like Trumpton, then having a positive vision was counterproductive. What he couldn't get his head around was that the positive vision he put forward was crap, and that's I would people forgive you for having a bad take, but because you have a bad take, then you declare an entire category of takes unnecessary and counterproductive. This, I think, speaks to his ego, and it was a very bad. And this is the origin of the whole "clear them out" meme, right?
Right.
People rejected his positive vision because it was crap. I wouldn't want to live in Trumpton. Nobody but a supremely boring middle class English person would want to live in Trumpton. And if it's full of these kinds of people, I wouldn't just not want to live in it. I would like to have multiple oceans and continents between myself and that place. It's like it's just cringe. But that's a difference of opinion, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's not something you kill people over or you just break with them. No, but this whole rejection of the positive vision as a category is what ires me.
Yeah. And I didn't like I'll try and play devil's advocate here because I'm actually quite neutral. Like as I was saying, I didn't really take much of I didn't comment too much on AA and Joel's back and forth. They both wrote really long posts and Substack articles, and I even think they did like a debate that from what I gathered, didn't go very well. It was kind of frustrating for all involved, and it was very lengthy. And I just usually don't have enough time to invest in those sorts of things. But the overall gist, I could see both sides, and um, it would be nice, if you and Academic Agent could talk more about this on a stream one day or something like that, because I get the impression that I think Academic Agent and the people who are taking the negative vision perspective, it's sort of motivated a little bit by the fact that we just don't have time to um, flesh out all those things that you mentioned. Like the centering of the cosmos and chaos versus order and that sort of thing. We just need to get these psychopaths, these liars, these megalomaniacs who are for the most part anti-white. So that would be a unifying factor for someone like you. Um, they are anti-white, even if some of them are white themselves. We just need to get rid of them because the stakes are so high right now and the clock is ticking, and it's 5 minutes to midnight and we don't have time to flesh out the positive vision. We got to go now, as I feel like that was some of the motivation behind it. But even as I was trying to appreciate both sides. I actually did fall on the side that was a bit critical of academic agents' negative vision and just clear them out. And I even made a little meme about that with just the NPCs, that the meme where it's just a crowd of NPCs, and I just made them all speaking, clear them out, because that was kind of the impression I was getting. It was just every time I would check in on his channel or his chat, everyone would just always be typing in all capital letters, clear them out, clear them out, clear them out. It's getting a bit almost NPC-ish, and
which
I just
which is something that people, I think, people are a little surprised that I lashed out against Nima precisely because I follow so much of his content, because I used to value it. Now I'm not so sure he's actually a valuable addition to the distant right.
well, we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah. But
Um,
this is actually the environment he tries to cultivate in his chat and among his audience,
a bit of
which,
radicalism, right?
not really radicalism, really just monomaniacal commitment to whatever AA says, which is something I saw with Nick Fuentes,
Yeah,
and I don't
definitely Nick
think we
Fuentes.
have the time for another AF type debacle.
Hmm. I'm not sure academic agent is trying to do something like America First or try to take a Nick Fuentes role, and I'll give him more benefit of the doubt than I give to Fuentes or any of his ilk. Um, but I I was just gonna say that this, even if I were to take, certain parts of negative vision and say, okay, that kind of makes sense, and I can make a concession here. At the end of the day, it just seems like you still do need to have a positive vision, because there's too many warnings from history about what can happen if you don't have a positive vision. And so, and even though if I didn't pay attention to all of Joel's complaints, like the question, who is the enemy, is one that you asked in your article as well, in the part that I read. And I think that, people said it was a bit of a hatchling thing, but I think it is a legitimate question, even though it can be frustrating and time consuming, and it can be a bit like, what do you mean who's the enemy? Open your eyes. It's Nancy Pelosi, it's the who's, the Rothschilds, it's Bill Gates, whatever, although I don't think Joel Davis and Keith Woods and all them consider Bill Gates to be much of an enemy, because they've reduced him to just being the quote unquote evil computer guy, as if he's completely inconsequential, and to have any concerns about his action is to be a schizo on Telegram, I guess. But again, these are the sort of the divisions and the fault lines and that are causing these ruptures.
Well,
And
people say open your eyes, and if your eyes are closed, you should open them, right? But the problem is not the eyes; it's the brain. Okay, so these people are the enemy. Why are they the enemy?
Mhm.
You know, because
Well,
enemy
exactly.
is
So,
a
and at the end
strong
of the day,
word.
what I was going to say is, I think even though it is a bit of a question of like, are you joking? What do you mean? Who's the enemy? I think it is a legitimate question, because I actually would consider someone like Nick Fuentes to be an enemy. I would consider someone like that to be an enemy. These are grifters, these are fraudsters, these are and I talking about positive vision. I don't want anything to do with Nick Fuentes's vision. I don't want anything to do with the Christian nationalism, Christian identitarianism vision. I don't care about it at all. And it's not something I'm working towards. In many ways, I think it's an impediment to what I would prefer to be working towards. So, yes, the question of who is the enemy, at times it might seem bloody obvious, but it's still one worth asking, because it's worth creating a positive vision. So in the final analysis, I think your article is really good. I recommend everyone get on Countercurrents and read it, because at the end of the day, I do think the positive vision is still necessary.
It's not only necessary, but it's implicit in the very notion of having enemies, right? So why do we have enemies? Or
Right.
let's think about it. Why is, I don't know, Joe Biden my enemy? Like I said, enemy is a very strong word. It has Schmittian implications, which we're not allowed to discuss on YouTube, and I'm not actually allowed to a little inside baseball here. I was investigated for on hate speech charges for quoting Carl Schmitt in
Wow.
Macedonia. Ultimately dropped, but yeah, quoting Carl Schmitt can be dangerous. So enemy is a very strong term, right? So if I'm going to name someone an enemy, I'm only really going to do it if they pose a threat to me and what I'm trying to accomplish. So what in this sense, you have to have a positive vision. You have to know what you are, who you are, and what you're trying to accomplish. There is no such thing. Like, person who can afford to have a purely negative vision is someone who is a literal slave, someone who is just told that guy over there, he's a fucking prick, right?
Hmm.
Why is he your enemy? Because someone above you in the hierarchy told you that guy is the enemy, right? We do not have the benefit of, like like the guy says in Lawrence in Arabia, thank God I have orders. We don't. We need an
Hmm.
ideological framework to orient ourselves because we are a diffuse and decentralized movement. This is actually a good thing. There is no single center which the enemy can target.
Hmm. Good
So we
point.
need an ideology or a religion or both to coordinate without directly coordinating. So that's what the positive vision accomplishes. The positive vision is implicit in the very notion of having an enemy. That guy is trying to frustrate what I'm trying to achieve in the world, right? What am I trying to achieve? I'm trying to achieve ethno states for white people, which cooperate with each other for shared interests, right? This is the long and this is the short version of my positive vision for the world. Anyone who opposes that, from Joe Biden to Klaus Schwab to Vladimir Putin to Xi
Hmm.
Jinping to Nicholas J. Fuentes, this is an enemy.
Right.
This is an enemy in the Schmittian sense, right? I have enemies because I'm trying to get shit done. I don't have enemies because I'm mad at people, right? I love quoting this from Schmitt. Let me just track down this specific quotation. The enemy is not the private foe, which uh, let me just
Go
find
on
the
as you look
exact
for. I'm
quote.
gonna I'm
Yeah,
gonna read
the
this
enemy is not
message
the
from.
private rivals, so it's not. I wrote this about like 100 years ago about blacks, why blacks don't mind black on black violence, but they mind police interference. Yeah, here it is. The enemy is not merely any competitor or just any partner of a conflict in general. He is also not the private adversary whom one hates. An enemy exists only when, at least potentially, one fighting collectivity of people confronts a similar collectivity. That's Carl Schmitt, Concept of the Political. And here I put it in the context of American race relations that basically when blacks kill each other over sports shoes, this is a private conflict. It's
Mm,
non-political, it's non-Schmittian. But when a white policeman or even a black policeman enters a black ghetto and tries to
mhm,
impose the white man's law on black people, this is an attack on the black collectivity by the white collectivity, and the blacks are right to resist this. In the Schmittian sense, doesn't mean we should let them run rampant. Uh, I believe that I have a nuanced position on blacks in America as well because I'm the cunty nuance guy, right?
Sure, sure. Okay, we've got about 15, 20 minutes. I usually keep these streams to about an hour and a half. So I wanted to keep following this line of thought. So we're talking about academic agent and this difference of opinion, as you put it, rightly so, I think, between this negative vision and positive vision. A few days ago, you posted something on your Telegram that was pretty spicy in regards to academic agent. Um, would you like to clarify some things that you stated? Would you like to maybe take back certain comments that you stated? Would you like to just for a few moments explain where you're coming from and why you made that post? Because, like I said, I'm not here to arbitrate or stem infighting. I don't mind infighting, as I've said. I think in the past maybe I would have had a problem with it, but I think there are significant differences that are occurring, and we might as well just make our positions clear and then carry on whatever way is necessary. So I'll give you the floor to just sort of flesh out what it is that you were frustrated with, or why you felt like you wanted to make that particular post, and then we'll carry on from there.
Yeah, for anyone who may not be in the loop, Pox is referring to a Telegram post I made on Saturday, which was, well, it was interpreted as a personal attack on Nima Parvini, and it is a personal attack. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I'm not going to pretend that he didn't deserve it. And I say he's an affirmative action hire, wrote for Quillette, believed in QAnon, promotes the Glowies, Curtis Yarvin, Costina Lamario, and Thomas Sear, subverts nationalism, and basically that his clear them out idea is stupid. The only thing I'm willing to say, I'm not really walking it back, but I am willing to admit that I have seen no evidence that Parvini is a diversity hire at the English department. Now, whether a non-white person in an English in a British university can ever truly be not affirmative action, that's a question for the ages, and people have pointed out that even if you are a non-white person who got there on merit, that shadow of doubt will always be on you, right? That's the only thing I'm willing to give a qualified retraction. And I'm going to admit I put it there because I was feeling particularly vicious. Like I said, I don't know. I've been frustrated
That's the
with the
impression
man himself.
yeah, that's the impression I got. That's why I wanted to invite you on, because I do get the impression, like, things are bubbling up. There's a lot of tension. Like, I'm really pissed off with certain people's consistently hypothermia-inducingly cold takes on COVID restrictions. I understand the frustration. That I sensed it, and that's why I invited you on. And also because, for me personally, like I said, I'm here to be sort of like the neutral. I still, rate Academic Agent highly. I think he does good work. He's done work that has helped me understand some things and modify my perspectives on things. So, but again, I'm not trying to be a referee. Like, if you want to stand by what you said, feel free. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. You were saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's really everything else I wrote out there. It's maybe unkind, but it is exactly that. I think he cavorts with people who are very obviously trying to cognitively infiltrate the dissident thought space and steer it towards various forms of cringe, who are trying to walk back the progress we have made towards racially radicalizing the white population in the West in the past several years. And I think that his blunder into the negative vision is just really feeding into these de-radicalization operations. People said, and when I say de-radicalization, you got to understand it's. I think the ultimate danger we face as identitarians is from the rise of an alt-light type movement in the West, which is actually successful and not as cringe as what the alt-light was in 2016, 17, and 18. Now, a lot of people may understand that the history of the alt-light, and Lana and Hendrik of Red Ice actually covered some of that fallout with Lawrence Southern accusing people of basically human trafficking.
Yeah, the human trafficking and the casting couch.
And I've known some people who've looked under the hood of the alt-light, and they're saying this is actually scummier than your average mafia type organization. I think the Sicilian mafia is like orders of magnitude more honorable than these people. But imagine a movement like that, which is not cringe, which is not corrupt, which is actually focused on its ultimate goal, which is gatekeeping against us and de-radicalizing the population. And we have a precedent for this, and this is the Nashi movement in Russia in the mid-2000s, when Russian ethnic nationalism began rising, mostly due to the activities of Maxim Marcinkiewicz, known as Tesak. Tesak means, well, I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't know the word in English, but it's a combination of a hammer and a hatchet. Uh, it's
Okay.
so what the government of Russia did, which is Russia is an authoritarian civic nationalist state. What the government did was organize a youth organization called Nashi, and Nashi means ours, which acted to crowd out the Russian ethnic nationalist movement and redirect the nationalist impulses of the Russian youth, the anti degeneracy impulses of the Russian youth, into support of authoritarian civic nationalism to essentially co opt nationalist energies for the center right.
Hmm.
And as a result, so this was a combined action. They propped up Nashi as an alternative to the various skinhead and national socialist and ethnic nationalist movements in Russia. And on the negative side, the government cracked down on ethnic nationalists, culminating with the arrest of Maxim Marcinkiewicz and his eventual murder by government agents in prison. And the few Russian ethnic nationalists and national socialists and skinheads who survived these purges moved to Ukraine, and many of them joined the Azov battalion, which now people are slandering as Jewish puppets, as NATO puppets. They're using a lot of unkind language about a group which is probably the only NS militia worth the name. And whatever your sentiments about National Socialism, personally, I'm not 100% enthusiastic about it, but it was a white identitarian movement, a German identitarian movement, which had a lot
Mhm.
of success. So
Yeah.
what I'm really and genuinely afraid of is an alt-light type movement, de-radicalization movement, which will be less cringe than the bullshit that Cernovich and Posobiec and Ezra Levant pushed, something that would be far more effective at de-radicalizing people, at turning them away from identitarianism. And I identified these people, which I name as cognitive infiltrators, and in particular, Costin Alamariu, who likes to call himself Bronze Age pervert, and Curtis Yarvin, who likes to call
Mhm.
himself Mencius Moldbug, right, as the standard bearers of such an attempt to de-radicalize the white nationalist and white identitarian movements. I don't think that Nima is in on this. I think he's being manipulated by these people. I think a lot of people are manipulated by these people without knowing it, right?
Mm.
I'm not sure about some people. I'm not going to name names. I'm still, in the dark about who is in on it and who is being manipulated. I see the Woodlander in the chat saying that UKIP in the UK did the same. This is a genuine risk. This is a genuine danger. There's also Tommy Robinson in the United
Sure.
Kingdom.
Yep.
There's also the what's her name, Jada Franson, the one with the big
Oh,
tits. In the
yeah. But
UK,
then also
there's
in
yeah.
Spain, you see this with Santiago Abascal, Vox. They're more mainstream. They're more legitimate, but they are also
I've heard good things about
they are.
Vox though.
Abascal is better than the party that he's president of, is what I would say. Um, or then also like Lega in Italy with Salvini. These they start off looking like everything you would want as a European nationalist, and they ultimately end up being quite de-radicalizing to the point where you get Salvini, the guy just can't stop taking photo ops with African migrants as long as they came
Right.
to Italy legally, and as long as they are giving votes to Lega. Now apparently they're just as Italian as Ragu. Like it's really it
Yeah,
is de-radicalizing. It is
I
disappointing.
found it so disgusting. As someone, I consider myself a trans Italian, right? So I'm an Italian trapped in a Macedonian's body. Yeah, it was just disgusting to see that. The fall of Salvini was one of the most blackpilling
Yeah,
experiences of my
yeah.
nationalist career.
So yeah, I definitely agree that this is this keeps happening, and that's why it's all the more disappointing. Okay, I've got a question for you in the chat. If you have any more questions for my guest, we'll keep going for about 10 more minutes here. If there are no more questions, then we'll just wrap it up. But here's a question. Interdimensional Harmony says, the enemy succeeded having capitalism and communism simultaneously. Shouldn't you consider creating your own alt-light? That way you can control it.
That is a very good question. I don't. I'm not sure what you mean by having capitalism and communism simultaneously. We should, if I mean, like, even if it is desirable, maybe this should be given to someone who is better equipped for subterfuge. I'm too autistic for subterfuge. Right. Even when I was selling stuff, I only sold stuff product I genuinely believed in, and actually leveraged my autism for better sales because people were impressed at just how much I believed in the product. But I'm not sure it is possible. I'm not, because the whole purpose, again, I'm talking about this. People are thinking like this stuff is mix and match. It's not. Once you have a positive vision, the operational side of things simply makes itself apparent to you. It just makes sense because the positive vision implies the path to success. The alt-light is based on deception. It is based on the false premise that the mind and biology are separate, that you can take a black person, an African from Nigeria, give him an Italian passport, teach him the Italian language, and have him convert to Catholicism, and this will transform him into an Italian. And Edward Dutton actually asked Alexander Dugin this thing.
Yep.
If a Nigerian moves to Russia, learns the Russian language, converts to Orthodoxy, pledges allegiance to the Russian state, is he a Russian? Dugin answered yes.
E.
I
Michael
say
Jones
no.
believes the same thing. As
Right.
If anyone from anywhere on the world, including sub-Saharan Africa or Asia, whatever, moves to Poland and converts to Catholicism,
Right.
they're now Polish just as much as the native population. And again, like talking about friend-enemy distinction, anyone who's promoting that idea, I consider that an enemy. I consider that certainly an antagonistic ideology that I have to deal with in combating, because I think it's quite toxic. It's quite dangerous because it threatens what I want to preserve, which is the actual identities of native Europeans, which and not even their identities, their biological reality, their ethnic reality, because Catholicism does form part of the Polish identity, but so does the Polish ethnicity, which is, in my opinion, more important. There are Polish people who might not be Catholic; they're still Polish. But
Right.
would Michael Jones say that, oh, well, the African migrant who's converted to Catholicism is now more Polish than you because he's converted to Catholicism than the native Pole who's an atheist? Like, that to me is actually, it's a threat to the thing that I want to protect, which is
Although I
European
will say,
ethnicities.
if you're not spiritually connected to your people, the potential within the biology is never properly activated. So with that caveat, so an atheist Pole is more Polish than the Catholic black person, but he's never fully Polish. And it's but I think that's a discussion for another day. So to respond
I was gonna push back, but we can leave that a little. We can leave that for another day.
to finish the answer to interdimensional harmony, right? The purpose of the alt-right, so the purpose of the alt-light is purely to misdirect nationalist energies away from identitarianism and into this cringe civic nationalism, and it's also a way to diffuse the anti-war impulses of libertarianism, right? It's not just a psyop on us, it's also a psyop on libertarians, because for all their faults, libertarians are anti-war, they're anti-imperialism, they are anti-Zionism, right? But the alt-light is pro-neocon, pro-war, pro-Zionism. So it's not just a psyop on us, it's a 2-for-1 op on the part of the regime to direct us into supporting Israel, into supporting war, into supporting interventionism, imperialism, all of this shit, because we're based defenders of the West, right?
Right.
Because the West is the best, right? So
Hmm.
we're not the only targets of the alt-right psyop. So in a sense, we cannot make our own alt-right, because the entire purpose, it would be like asking, I don't know, it's like asking the Catholic Church to create its own Islam. You know,
Yeah.
I can see myself creating, like, basically, let's have the theoretical, I'm king of Macedonia or whatever, and I have a problem. There's a bunch of communists in my country, and I cannot, for whatever reason, physically remove them or re-educate them. So I set up a communist party, which goes nowhere.
Hmm.
But this is something you do from a position of power, and not from a position of absolute power, but from a position of power where you cannot physically round up these people or simply brainwash them. So you have to misdirect them. You have to
Hmm.
misdirect their energies. So, yeah, we cannot have our own alt light, because the entire purpose of the alt light is deception. We do not stand for deception. We may use deception tactically, although I advise against it, right? Mostly because I'm a very bad liar. I prefer to tell the truth. So yeah, that's my very long answer to that. I don't think we can, because our operational framework does not allow for such deceptions, and our position in the battlefield, so to speak, does not allow for such maneuvers.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said that, because I sometimes wonder if it's just simply not in our biospirit as European nationalists, as dissidents. One of the things we value is honesty, and we definitely admire and venerate traditional values, even going back, very, very far, even into ancient history. We venerate the idea, like the manner band, masculinity, um, and so
Well, speak
it's
for
a very
yourself. I'm a firstborn son. I don't have to join Mannerblends. Yeah, this says something
but the
people
idea that,
don't realize, that the Kurias, which is the Indo-European Mannerbund, it was a collection of second sons, whereas the firstborn sons would just inherit the land of the father and rule as princes, right? So yeah, I'm not a mama thief, so I don't have to join the Kurias.
well, I'm a second-born son, so I guess I would, and that kind of explains a lot then,
Ah,
because
yes. So
it
you're
does.
one of the mama thieves. I know your kind.
So I think that, I've noticed this, that often, because we value directness and honesty, it's almost like the sort of, the old Germanic biospirit is just so prevalent in our side, and it's venerated, and many people are called to aspire to it. It makes things difficult for us to be Machiavellian. It makes things difficult for us to be a bit more like the who sometimes, who use subterfuge and infiltration and deception, and misdirection. But I think that there are times where we could do well to learn from that sort of the darker arts, um, which maybe some other ethnicities are better at. Maybe I think obviously Machiavelli was Italian. There are other parts of Italian culture where um, they utilize the dark arts a bit more. Obviously, Italy is often considered very corrupt as far as its government is concerned, but also Italians in general um, are a bit sneaky at times. Even if you look at how they play football in comparison to the English and how they play football. Um,
Yeah.
so it's an interesting question. I do think that sometimes the
Yeah,
the
it's
the
a
directness and the honesty of
yeah.
the dissident right and the European nationalists can sometimes be a bit of its downfall, because we do need to be a bit more subtle and conniving at times.
About Italian versus English football. When I watched football at the time, I noticed that the primary difference between Anglo and Spanish football is style of play. Anglos like to lob very long passes across the entire pitch, like They prefer the ball to have the ball in the air and lob to each other and bypass enemy defense, whereas the Spanish really like short on the ground passes to which move around very quickly. And so, ironically, the English are very much like the German Bewegungskrieg, maneuver type warfare,
Yeah.
whereas the Spanish like to slug it out, and the Italians are very sneaky when they play football.
Yes.
It's
I mean,
and
modern football now,
yeah,
the national differences are much, they've been
yeah.
minimized so much,
There
but
there are no differences anymore.
not
I'm
really.
talking, of course, from my experience watching football in the
The
90s and
old, but
early
the old
2000s.
distinction, one of
Yeah,
the old distinctions, not so much style of play, and even up into like late 2010s, of the last decade, there was still this idea that the English would never dive, the English would never pull on jerseys, the English would never
right.
poke a finger in the eye, that sort of thing. Of course, that's changed now. You'll find English players diving too,
Yeah,
but in comparison to the Italians,
in the
Italians are taught to do that. Italians are taught
actual
to do those cynical things. So because they know
right.
it's okay, it's better to get that player a yellow card than it is to play the through pass that might get you a goal, because later that guy in the yellow card can get sent off and now we have another advantage. So it's just totally
Yeah.
different mindset between the honorable Englishman who wants to play honorably, and the Italian who's like, yeah, we learned from Machiavelli.
But I will add that I love this whole English thing about from Wayne Rooney. You remember Wayne Rooney?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's not really English. He's Scouse. He's from Liverpool, and they're Irish, right? The Scouts are genetically Irish. Let's not beat around the bush there, right? But I love it how he's on the pitch. He's honorable. He didn't dive. He didn't fight. But
Hmm.
off the pitch, he says to Cristiano Ronaldo, "If you ever come to Liverpool, mate, you're gonna get your f word ass kicked.
Hmm.
You're going. All of my mates are gonna dogpile on you. We're gonna shit in your face. All it's like saying all of these, and he's very upfront about it. You come
That
to
was his teammate at the
Liverpool,
time, wasn't it? They were still playing for Man United together.
right? Or maybe Cristiano Ronaldo was for another. I think they had a dispute, and Cristiano Ronaldo is one of these people who's notorious for diving, for
Yeah.
crying, and
I
I
think
think
that their
Rooney
dispute came
was
in like '06 when Rooney stomped
yeah
on his groin, and then Ronaldo
yeah
made a bigger deal out of it than it was. I mean, it was kind of a shitty thing to do, but of
right.
course, Ronaldo
I
Ronaldo being
just love
Mediterranean made
that.
a big thing about it because he knew that he could get Rooney sent off, and he did.
Yeah, and Rooney was just so peeved off about it. He I think he really risked his career at that time by threatening Ronaldo like that. Cristiano Ronaldo.
Hmm.
It's I've never liked Cristiano Ronaldo. He's a cunt. He's just a cunt. He's got this punchable face, which I don't like. I don't like the cut of his jib. That's all
All
I'm gonna
right.
say. I'm sorry.
Well,
And
that's all right
we
then.
had a broader point about this. Why aren't we so Machiavellian, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Because I think
I
the
don't think
online right is
it's for lack
mostly
of
Anglo, and it's and
yeah,
Anglo also being an offshoot of Germanic, and so you don't
right.
get as much of that sort of perhaps Italian or Spanish.
Although you
Um,
get the meme of the
s-
perfidious Anglo, right? Right. And
yeah,
so it's a mixed bag with the
but
English.
the perfidious Anglo believes still that what he's doing is righteous and just,
Hmm.
whereas the Italians, when they're, for example, being cynical on the football pitch, they know they're being cynical. Like one of the great moments of it was a great meme as well. I was so pleased, I was so happy. Was during the European Cup when an Italian defender just pulls the jersey of a passport English player. He's African, but he plays for England. But during the final, this English player was about to make a run clean on goal, and the Italian defender just grabs him by the jersey and pulls him to the ground. It was completely cynical, knowingly
Yeah.
cynical, but it
Yeah.
stopped a goal scoring opportunity. And no one in Italy felt bad about it. Everyone applauded that was a great piece of
Um,
defending. Whereas in
you
England, that's
remember
foul play, that's wrong.
remember the final match in 2006 between Italy and France when
Yes, of course.
basically I forget who was it, Gennaro Gattuso, someone provoked Zinedine
Materazzi,
Zidane who huh?
Materazzi,
Yeah, the right.
Materazzi, and he
Uh,
Gattuso would actually do well in England. He was admired in England because he was a warrior and he was actually kind of honest in his grit. Whereas Materazzi was
I
again that
love.
perfect.
He was at the time he was one of my favorite footballers, Gennaro Gattuso.
Yeah.
Just by the amount of yellow cards he would just rack up, I saw, yeah, this guy's a fighter. But
But
what was his name?
Materazzi was a dickhead,
Yeah,
and that was
Materazzi. Yeah,
different. Yeah, he
yeah.
wound up Zidane to that famous headbutt.
He provoked Zidane to attack him, and Zidane, he's Zinedine Zidane. He's Algerian. He's Franco-Algerian. He I think Materazzi said something like, "Your mother is an Algerian whore, right? She sucks my dick."
Or
And my
terrorist. I think he even called her like your mother's a terrorist or something like that. It was pretty,
right.
pretty
So it
spicy.
was really below the belt. Like it was just really below the belt. I would have punched him for that. Yeah. And so Zinedine Zidane just headbutted him in the chest, knocked him out, and got sent off. But Zidane was actually one of the best players France had. And this is the final, so there's not going to be long-term consequences for Materazzi. It was just so evil. It just hit all the right buttons, and he knows it. Like, it's not. Basically, Anglos are very surprised at how we Mediterraneans respond to insults about our mothers, but Materazzi knows. Like, Italians know that mama is a big deal, to the Arabs as well, to the Algerians as well. It was
not even just
pure
football,
Machiavellianism.
I think like there was even a saying in Italy, like, only a fool pays his taxes. Like, everyone, not just the elites and the politicians, everyone is doing some sort of scheme here and there to not pay their full taxes, or to scam, because everyone is being scammed anyway. So it's like, and this is why people say that there's always these predictions that Italy is just going to collapse into total failure any given day now, and yet it somehow manages to keep going on and on and on.
I wrote about it like in an article that people have been predicting that Italy will collapse since the time of Count Cavour.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
since the time of unification.
Aren't you like? And I was saying this. I was listening to Academic Agent and Charlemagne. They were talking about how France and Italy are so corrupt, and there's so much government power there that these countries will collapse within 10 years. And I'm like, you're talking about France, which is a nuclear power, and Italy, and these two are major industrial powers. They're major military players in the world. You're talking that these countries, if your model says these countries will collapse, and these countries are actually not just surviving but thriving, then there's something wrong with your model, buddy. And if everyone's models,
the corruption of Italy, it's just, I always said that when I defend Italy, that it's not that Italy is incredibly corrupt. It's not that Italy is, significantly more corrupt than the honorable Northern European nations. No, it's just that Italy is perhaps not so good at keeping their corruption covered up. They're quite open about it. And there's always a scandal every few years. There's always a corruption scandal, whether it's in politics or whether it's in football. But some of for example, some of the scandals that have happened in Italian football have happened in other leagues, have happened in English leagues, have happened in Northern European leagues. It's the same sort of corruption. It's just that in Italy, it doesn't get covered up as well. It eventually gets exposed. So, I mean, you could even argue that that's something in Italy's favor. Whereas the corruption of like a country like the United States, or the corruption of a country like Great Britain, it's more, there's this veneer of, oh no, the Americans would never be corrupt. They're so upstanding, and the British would never be corrupt because they're so upstanding. Because they have that reputation, but really they are just as corrupt. It's just, they don't keep it under wraps or they keep it under wraps better than the Mediterraneans do.
Yeah, I've actually used this when I discuss Macedonian politics. People say there's this complex of lesser worth in the East and in the South. And Macedonia is part of both. It's Southeastern Europe, it's Slavic and Mediterranean at the same time. That, our country is crap and our government is corrupt, but the West is good. And I'm like, no. And the 2020 election in America is like, we're on YouTube, so we're not allowed to
The
Talk about
20 it
it.
was the most fortified
Yeah.
election ever. It was
I'm
more
like, okay, look,
fortified than any Italian election I can think of.
we have fortification of elections here in Macedonia, but it was never that bad.
Yeah.
Well, like it was in 2020.
Yeah.
And I said at the time when I was on Millennial, like if a two-horse country with which is one of the poorest in Europe can have a very simple, you fill out a physical ballot in a voting booth and you put the ballot in a box. If we can vote like that, so can America,
Yeah.
right? It's not rocket science. We had the Hillary emails, right? We realized she sold like 20% of America's uranium to the Russians
Hmm.
for kickbacks. I don't think anything of that scale has ever really happened in Italy. I think that, yeah, you're right there that the Anglos, the Germans, they are hypocritical. There's also, the whole thing about German chancellors joining Rosneft or whatever, Gerhard Schroeder, uh, basically profiting off of his position as former German chancellor in the Russian energy sector.
Hmm.
It's whereas we in the South, like, okay, so Silvio Berlusconi had an orgy.
Yeah,
So fucking
exactly,
what? I'm
exactly,
like, is this really more horrible than selling 20% of a country's uranium? So he
exactly.
likes to fuck sexy young women. So do I.
I couldn't have put it better. Exactly, that's a great
Yeah.
comparison.
What is more horrible, really? Selling strategic assets to a hostile country, or having an orgy, having bunga bungas?
Exactly. All right. Well, I think that was an interesting tangent, but I enjoyed it. I think it's a good note to end on. So thank you very much, Nix, for coming on. I hope you enjoyed your time on the Sunday stream, Monday
Yeah,
edition.
I haven't discussed football in years.
Yeah,
It was
me
it was a
neither.
certain good experience.
It was good. I'm actually going to be writing something for my Substack about sports ball, so people can look forward to that if they are following me there on Substack. Um, you can follow Nix on Telegram. He's got a Telegram channel, and of course, he hosts the Writers Bloc every Sunday, and then also he writes frequently for Countercurrents, so you can check him out there. Thank you very much, everyone in the chat, for your participation, for your questions. And we will see you all next time. Take care. Bye bye.
Ciao.